Hi, and welcome to episode 150 of the Assembly Lines podcast. I'm Chris Torrance. I'm really excited to have reached such a milestone in my YouTube series, and I want to thank all of my subscribers and my Patreon supporters for helping me get here. I know it's been a while since I've released a video, and that's primarily because I've been busy working on my Apple II emulator. But I thought I would take a break to show off some of the new features. For this episode, I want to broadcast a repeat of my talk at KansasFest 2023. I gave this talk a few months ago at KansasFest as well as the virtual A24EVR event, and I went over a lot of the features of my emulator as well as answered some questions. So I'm going to go ahead and play that for you now. And then in the next episodes, I'll try to go over some of the features that I've added since July. So let's get started. So let me get started. So I'm talking today about the Apple2TS, which is the name of my Apple II emulator. For those of you who have been following my YouTube channel, plug there for the YouTube channel, I started a series about a year and a half ago where I decided to write a Apple II emulator using TypeScript, which is a flavor of JavaScript. So JavaScript, is a web programming language. It has a kind of a bad reputation. It's not strongly typed. It's very loosey-goosey. And so, a lot of people scoff at it. TypeScript is an attempt to fix that. So that was actually, I think it was Microsoft that started that project. It basically takes JavaScript and turns it into kind of a real programming language. And, maybe people will debate me on that. But it's actually a lot of fun. Things are typed so you can know what's going on. I use the Visual Studio Code editor, which was kind of designed, really for TypeScript. I mean, it works with a lot of other languages, but using VS Code with TypeScript it's just amazing. It helps you write the code basically, content assist and jumping to and fro different functions. So it's a lot of fun, and you might ask, well, why do we need another emulator? Clearly, there are a lot of ones out there. They're fantastic. I use Virtual 2 on my Mac every day. In fact, it was like, indispensable when I was developing this, light years ahead of anything that I've done. On Windows, you have Apple Win, which is fantastic, or, you have MAME, which is sort of like I don't think it's a Ferrari. What would be something that's incredibly complicated and impossible to use, but powerful? I don't know what kind of car that would be. The space shuttle or a tractor, yes. So, there's a lot of fantastic emulators out there. This was not an attempt to create something necessarily better or to replace any of those. It was really just a fun project that I started, mostly for my YouTube channel. So, what is it? It's a enhanced Apple IIe. It 128K RAM. I won't read all this. It basically has all the features of a Apple IIe, and since it's running in the browser, you obviously can get whatever speed your computer is capable of. I just have a little note there on my MacBook, running in Chrome. If I turn off the throttling, the 1 megahertz, I can get it to run, up to 32 megahertz, in terms of speed. Not that that's kind of ridiculous at that speed, but yeah, I'm not going to go through all this. It supports all of the major file formats, so you can import, disk images, WAS, hard drive images, etc. And it's actually deployed out on GitHub pages, and I'll get to that in a minute. And finally, it also works as a progressive web application. So if you don't know what that is, that's basically some browsers, especially Chrome, if you go to a web page and it's written as a web application, you can actually click a button in the upper right and you can say, install this as an application on my desktop. And it looks just like an app. And you can even assign a file format to it. So you can double click on a file and it'll launch just that application in a totally separate window. It's still a web browser under the covers, but it's not tied to, say your running Chrome application. Okay. kind of going fast. But I'm not going to go through the architecture. The main point I wanted to make here is, maybe there's 2 points. One is that it's somewhat organized, and so I've tried to do things the right way. And so basically what I've done in the code is I've split the, for an emulator, you kind of have 2 pieces. One is the display portion, and the other portion is the actual 6502 itself. And so I've split those into 2 separate threads or processes, whatever you want to call it, in the browser. And so you have the main process, which is displaying what looks like an Apple IIe, and then you have the Apple IIe itself, the 6502, running in a completely separate, what's called a worker thread in JavaScript, and they just communicate back and forth. And I didn't do this originally, which was a huge mistake because it was really hard to switch afterward, but it made a significant improvement in the performance. And you wouldn't think so because there's a lot of information that has to get passed back and forth. Basically, when every time the Apple, actually 60 times a second, it basically has to pass across all of the text memory or high-res or low-res memory back and forth so it can display. JavaScript has no problem doing that. The problem I was having before, where it was all just one continuous basically process, is I could never get it to run at 1 megahertz. And the actual CPU, and the reason why is because it was competing with the 60 frames per second that the browser was attempting to refresh. And since I was trying to refresh the CPU at 60 frames per second, you had a conflict. Martin, question?
Oh, sorry, this is what I'm getting on the YouTube stream.
Is that like a, what does that say?
It's not like, it doesn't resemble what's
Ah.
It just looks like an earlier version that's just...
Oh, hit refresh. You might be frozen. Sometimes, maybe can somebody else check on the live stream whether it's actually, is it keeping up?
I'm getting the same thing.
I just clicked it from the Discord.
Do you think it stopped streaming?
No, I don't know.
It's good.
Brit is getting the right signal. Yeah.
And it's live?
And that one looks live? Good? Okay. Martin, I'm so sorry.
It's just me.
You'll have to watch
No, it's me.
live.
It's me too,
Yeah,
Mark.
you as
Yeah.
well.
It might-
Just getting this.
Yeah.
It might be the bandwidth down here as well. That can be a problem. So.
It's live 2023, right? /live 2023?
Yeah. No, I don't know what that URL is.
It's not that one.
Okay, then
I think that one ended.
it ended.
The one that today is KFest Friday 2023.
That's the title of it. Yeah. The URL should be a bunch of like
Yeah.
gloop.
This is working for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm just going to keep going and hope
It's working.
hope for the best. Yeah. Okay. So enough of that. Just real quick, I don't want to go through all the gory details of the emulator. Just some really interesting things that I found along the way. So one thing that you have to worry about is how do you handle memory and soft switches. So on an Apple II, Apple IIe, a lot of the functionality is controlled by what are known as soft switches. So you write or read from an address on the computer, and it completely changes the behavior. So for example, if you write to a certain address, all of a sudden, rather than using the main memory of the computer, you're using the upper 64K of memory, like your little auxiliary card. Or you're turning on high-res graphics or something. Or you're using banked memory or something. And so you have to handle this, right? And so the way I did this, originally I was doing it basically every single memory address or access of memory, I would say, okay, well, what's the status of my soft switches? And then I would just have this, I basically had like this giant nested if statement. Horrible. So Tom Phelps, who presented here a few years ago on the IIe Emulator, AIIe, he wrote to me and he's like, dude, there's a much better way to do this, which he used in his emulator, which is basically to use a lookup table. And so what I have is just a giant block of memory and then a separate lookup table. So only when a soft switch is changed, I just go and change the lookup table. And so I say, okay, well now, from now on, whenever you go and access a certain memory location, you're going to get that from here. Okay, does that kind of make sense? And I can go into more details, after the talk about that. So that sped up the emulator tremendously because it just wasn't doing all this checking every single time. Graphics, very hard. Still probably work in progress. And the reason why, as we all know, and we heard from some talks yesterday about the VGA converter, is the Apple II graphics are, some might say, weird, right? It's essentially a black and white computer that's faking color, and the color is dependent upon the position of a dot on the screen. So you have to take that into account when you're creating an emulator. And not only that, you get these weird kind of fringing effects where if you have two colors next to each other, they produce a certain, or two dots next to each other, they're going to produce one color. If you only have one dot there, it might produce brown. It could produce some sort of strange off green color. It's not the color that you might expect. And so the way I handled this, which was where Virtual 2 came in really handy, was basically I double the width of the screen. So the Apple IIe screen, normally it's 270 dots, but what I'm doing is I'm using a array that's 560 dots across, and I'm just saying, okay, well, this color, which normally would be orange, is actually going to be brown because there's no pixels next to it. And you can see at the bottom here, I have a comparison of, this is Michael Pohoreski, who is a developer on AppleWin, who was also one of the team members for Nox Archaist. And he wrote a test program for AppleWin to take a look at, what do the colors look like. And so I've run his test program, and so you can kind of see, here's what a real monitor looks like on the left. And this was taken on my Apple Color, using an iPhone. Here's what Virtual 2 looks like, and here's what my emulator looks like. And so you can see, for both of these cases, we're more or less getting the colors correct, but we're clearly not capturing the CRT-ness, right? And actually AppleWin does an amazing job of trying to, really emulate what a CRT looks like. Eventually, I could put more time into this, make it look better, but that's sort of, it's good enough for now. Sound is really hard. And the reason why is because in an Apple IIe, you have a 1-bit speaker. So, it's basically an on-off. That sounds simple, but the trouble is because you're running the 1 megahertz chip, you can actually access that speaker so fast that it doesn't have time to do a full up and a full down before the next blip of the speaker comes in. And so this is how you can do things like pulse width modulation. So those of you who have played Nox Archaist, actually, when you bring up the splash screen, there's some boom, boom, booms, and these little sound effects that are done with that effect. That, on a modern computer, is extremely hard to do. Not impossible, but the trouble is, on the browser, you're limited by the API. So Virtual 2 has no problems doing sound. AppleWin can do sound. Because they're running at the, they can just do whatever they want because they're in complete control of the computer. With the web browser, you're limited by the API. In that case, the API gives you, you can basically run sounds up to the speed of like a CD-ROM. So 44,000 hertz, is like the upper limit of the sound effects that you can get on a browser. And that is just not good enough to simulate some of these Apple IIe sound effects. Okay, and I can talk more about that offline. And I'm also looking for suggestions as to how to make it better. So as I said before, it has support for all of these different file formats. So it supports ProDOS block. It's also Smartport driver. Right now I only have reading from Smartport. And the only reason I needed to add that was actually for the pitch dark disk image. So pitch dark is a bunch of Infocom games that Cucumba and others put together. It uses Smartport, and as soon as I tried to boot it up in my emulator, it didn't work, and so I had to add support for Smartport for that. And the way this works in my emulator is it basically looks to see, is somebody accessing the disk drive? And if they are, I notice that in my code and just jump to a separate little JavaScript routine which says, okay, well, since you don't have a physical hard drive, go ahead and just read the bits from the file, basically. Turns out that it's actually incredibly fast to do that because you already have the entire file in memory. And the way the Apple works is it always asks for ProDOS blocks in 512-byte blocks. And so you just give it 512 bytes all at once. So it turns out to be way faster in an emulator than if you were actually on like physical media, like a hard drive. Okay. I feel like I'm just talking super fast. One of the really fun things about doing a project like this is you get to just do whatever you want. And so I suddenly realized one day, well, since I have the entire Apple IIe going, I know everything that's happening. I know when it's doing whatever. And so you can put in like what I've called custom handlers. And so basically if you load up certain games in my emulators, and I have about a dozen or so that it knows, oh, I've started Aztec or something like that. It can actually say, okay, I know that these 3 bytes in memory are where the key routine is for Aztec, and I'm just going to insert a special handler. And so I've done things like when it detects a certain game, it'll bring up a little help screen, and I'll show this, or it will change the way the keyboard works. So for example, for Kratea, as soon as I tried this on the phone, I realized I couldn't play the game because there's no arrow keys on the keyboard in an iPhone. You bring up the keyboard, there's no arrows, and so you can't move your little guy in Kratea. So I just added, I think it's like N and M are now left and right in addition to the arrow keys. You can also do things like modify the code. So Castle Wolfenstein, everybody knows you run into the wall, super annoying because it makes a terrible noise. Not anymore in mine because I just blip out those, I just changed the assembly code. And so those bytes are just no ops, basically. And then finally, you can do things like add joystick support. So, I added joystick support for Aztec, right, which is notorious for the number of keys that you have to use. But you can plug in a game controller, and you can just play Aztec with a joystick. Okay, questions on that? Okay, let me just switch over real quick. That was a lot of, yeah.
I do have questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So something I didn't understand
Mm-hmm.
is that I followed you on your YouTube series.
Yeah.
And I saw, when you were originally starting, you had written, 6502, it could, like the different opcodes and everything like that. You
Yeah.
started the programming, you didn't do them all, but you.
Yep.
But then there was like a big jump to, okay, here's an Apple II.
Yeah.
And so somewhere in there you have to plug in the ROMs, you have to, for the characters and all. Like I didn't see that part.
Yeah. And I'm not really talking about that today. And
I'm curious to know.
maybe I should apologize. I think my YouTube channel kind of comes and goes in terms of when I put out videos, and a lot of it is just time and interest or whatever. And so, yes, there actually were some jumps. So, when you're creating an emulator, you basically, there's 2 pieces to it. One is, like I was saying, kind of creating the front end of it, and then the other one is the back end of the actual 6502, right, the chip. And so when I created the actual emulator part, I got the ROMs, right, so you can find the ROMs online, perhaps not necessarily legally, but you can download those, right? You just put those into the memory, and so I talked before about how I have this kind of big block of memory with a lookup table. The ROM is just a chunk of that, right? It just gets read in from a file when the emulator starts up, right? And then for things like the graphics, it basically is requesting, okay, I want to display, whatever the graphics is, just give me a chunk of memory of whatever should be on the screen. And so then the emulator itself says, okay, well, I'm in high-res mode. I'm going to send you a chunk of high-res data or something like that. And so it just reads it from the memory, sends it across, and displays it. Does that kind of answer your?
It does.
Okay.
You're right. I think there was a part I didn't get.
Yeah.
I didn't understand. So
Yeah. I meant to do videos on graphics, like high-res, double high-res, which was a lot of fun because I actually knew nothing about double high-res. I haven't done those videos, so maybe in the future. So anyway, this is the emulator itself. Right now I'm running locally, but I'll show you how to run it on your own. And so I just have kind of this little welcome screen, which kind of tells you some of the keyboard shortcuts. Down on the bottom, there is a bunch of controls. So you can boot it up, you can change the color mode, turn the sound on and off, change whether you're running at regular speed or high speed. Right now there's only 2 speeds. It'd be nice to have more. A few keyboard buttons. So on an iPhone or an Android, you don't have like an escape key. And so I've added little buttons for that so you can actually click that on your screen. Probably I'm missing some as well. On the right-hand side down at the bottom are the disk drives. And so actually for these, the 3 down there, it doesn't really matter which one you click on. You can load any disk format into any of them, and it'll do the right thing. And there's a lot of stuff that's hard-coded right now. So the hard drive is in slot 7. The 2 floppies are in slot 6. There's no way for the user to change that. I have to go into my code. And then I've actually added a lot of kind of pre-canned disk images. So if you click on the box of floppies there, so it ships with all of these different games and utilities just built in. And so if, let's say I can click on Total Replay, it'll boot up and boom, and there's Total Replay. And then one thing I found yesterday that I didn't even know you could do is hold down the arrow key, and apparently this is a thing you're supposed to do in emulators to show, look, this is amazing. So there, that was amazing. Yeah, so thank you. Yeah. And if you actually turn off if you turn it on fast speed and do that, it's just a black screen because it can't even keep up. But basically, that's what I was kind of saying about the ProDOS blocks, where it's just reading the bytes from memory so quickly, that it can just kind of keep up with, your keystrokes. So if let's see, if I go back and I just type like Kratea, which I think I always use for my demos because it's one of my favorite games. So it'll boot up, and then you can see as it's booting, it actually changed the text on the right-hand side. You don't have to read that, but it knows, this is Kratea. And it tells you what the controls are. It's added in a couple extra controls like the keyboard. And we'll just get it going here. And sounds great, right? No problems with sound. Sound is perfect until you boot up Nox Archaist, and then you are sad. So it has no problems with just regular, very simple tonal sounds where you're just, plugging the computer very.
Also with modulation of right out?
Right out, yes. Yeah, so here's the game, and obviously you can play it. Go ahead.
For your detection of the program, doesn't count on where you're loading from. It's not like you need a diskette or whatever. You could load it from Nox Archaist or from a Total Recall.
Yeah.
Or like a standalone copy.
That's correct. Yeah. I will say if you had like a really weird version of a game or maybe like a beta version of Kratea or something like that, where it's just looking for where the a certain number of bytes are in memory, and so if those bytes aren't there, it's just not going to detect it. And it's a little inefficient because it's doing it all the time. I mean, not every it's like basically like I think when I load a disk, then it checks hey, what are the bits that just got loaded in memory. Which turned out to be a big problem for some games. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with the game Snoggle, which is a Broderbund game that's like Pac-Man. It's a clone of Pac-Man that they got into big trouble with. But that game basically, I'm looking for my keyboard cable here, or joystick cable. So Snoggle is a game where it loads itself into memory, and then it completely copies itself to a different portion of memory before it runs. And so I ran into a situation where I could either have the help displayed, but not have my custom keyboard controls, or vice versa, right? Because, so what I ended up doing then is having 2 different, there's like one for loading, where it'll display the help, and then it's also looking for a different 3 bytes in memory for, things like, okay, what are the keyboard controls you want for this game or something. So there's a lot of subtleties and complexities, and I'm sure it could be better. So let me see if I can actually. How are we doing on time? Am I okay? 10:22. Okay, I have no idea how that even. How long have I been talking?
22 minutes.
Okay, good. All right. So let me plug this in and see if I can actually get this to work. Oh, there we go. Okay, so here's the little guy. He's moving. And we'll just go up here. So, by the way, anybody who has a gamepad like this, so modern browsers just support these right out of the box. Ken, could you come up here for a minute, though? I need your help. Yeah, so if you're interested in writing web applications, there's a gamepad API, and it just works. Here, would you play that for a minute and tell people what's happening?
What's happening?
Yeah, do you feel anything?
Nausea.
No. When you get hit?
Oh, there's force feedback.
Yes.
It's tactile. Nice.
Yeah, so another thing.
If you die, does he get a big shock or something in the controller?
Oh, yeah, I should have, if you fall off the cliff, you'll feel it. You'll feel it. Yeah, so the gamepad interface on modern browsers, it has support for what's called rumble or force feedback. And so on Kratea, what I did is I found the memory location. I think it's like 1E or something like that. And I noticed, okay, that's the one that controls or basically counts how much life you have and how much life the enemy has. And so I'm just watching that, watching. And every time I notice it changes, I say, rumble, right? Or do force feedback. And actually, the API lets you choose what it actually feels like. And so for you getting hit, it feels one way. For the other guy getting hit, it feels different. And so you just, you can just do fun things like this, right? I don't know what use this is. Castle Wolfenstein, actually, what I did is, maybe this is even more annoying. So now when you run into the wall, you don't get the sound. Instead, you get the rumble. So you feel it, right, when you run into the wall. Yeah, it's kind of fun. And then you can also, I won't necessarily, well, I can boot it up, but Electronic Arts released One-on-One, Dr. J and Larry Bird, and awesome game. A lot of my brother and I love this. The problem with this game is, if you play two-player, one poor person has to use the keyboard, and I can't remember whether you have to switch, but right? Yeah, defense uses the keyboard, right? But with this, right, because it supports the game controllers, right, you can now play two-player. I have another gamepad if anybody wants to come up afterward and go two-player head-on-head on one-on-one. It's so much more fun, right? And there actually was a product out pretty recently that lets you actually do this on a real Apple IIe, but now you can do the same thing on the gamepad. Let me see, what else? So you can change the color. So there's green screen mode. There's orange. These are just hard-coded, so whether those are good colors or not. One other thing I did, if I boot up, actually, I also created it so it has a custom file format. So it's this A2TS, and these are just a special file format that's like saving the state of the emulator, and so you can restore these. And so here I am in the middle of KansasFest, and so I can walk around. Again, Tom Phelps with the IIe Emulator, he invented time travel. So if I go off into the ocean, I'm drowning. All characters dead. If I hit Control left arrow, I'm just going back in time. Or I can go forward in time and drown. So you go back in time, hit the space bar, and now you're back alive again. So.
Are there any paradoxes due to this?
Oh, probably. I'm sure. You kill yourself or something. Yeah. So that's just a fun feature. You're
Yourself out of the ocean.
Yeah, you pull stuff out of the. You're playing Choplifter. You step on one of the guys by mistake. Well, you just back up and start over. So it's saving the exact same state that it uses to save out to the disk as well. So it's just the same chunk of memory. What else? Oh, so what I was going to point out is for KansasFest, for example, since it's a game that is high-res graphics, it basically any text on the screen has the problem of like color fringing, right? And so let me here, hold on, I'm going to reset this, and we'll bring it up. Maybe I can do it. Yeah, let me just bring up the same one I had. And if I hit the tab key, okay, so here's some text on the screen. Some users, don't like all the fringing or whatever, but I have a mode where it basically, you can't really tell with this font, but with the other font in KansasFest, it basically turns off some of the fringing. And so this is something that Apple IIe also did as well, and it just makes it kind of look a little bit nicer, so it's kind of more readable, I guess. And that's just modifying the way I display the high-res graphics on the screen.
Does that
You know, I think with this font, you can't tell. I would have to, I wonder if I switch to, where is Knox? Right there in the middle. This might have the, oh, do you want to hear the sound?
Yeah.
Okay, don't make fun of me. You'll kind of hear the problem, and like if you run like the music construction set, that's another great one to show off how bad your emulator is. Do you hear it? Yeah, it has no, it knows something's happening, but it just cannot deal with the up and down that's happening so fast. And I also don't have Mockingbird support in yet because I'm scared. I don't know how to do Mockingbird. The documentation is very minimal, but that's something that I want to do in the future. So yeah, here now fringing is turned off. So let me turn it back on. Okay, so it might be a little hard to tell from the back, but if you look on, say, start a new game, you can kind of see how there's green and kind of purple. If I turn off fringing, everything just crisps up, right? So that's nice, you know. Okay.
Except the part that you can take your game at the top.
Yeah, right, and that's really interesting, right? Because that's highlighted text, and so that the color fringing, for whatever reason, doesn't help with that. And I don't know whether that's me and the way I've implemented this, or whether it's just something about the fringe text. Okay, I'm sure there's a million other things that I could demo, but that's probably a good place to stop. If you want to actually try it out, so let me switch back real quick here to the keynote. So real quick, some thanks for people that have helped me with this. I'm sure I'm forgetting some names on there. A list of other things that I want to do in the future. The first one is probably Mockingbird support. I just want to, that's cool. So that'd be fun. And this is available now. And so you can go on your browser, on your phone, Apple2TS.com. This is actually hosted by GitHub Pages, which is amazing. It's been around for like 6 years, but I just discovered it. So basically, on GitHub, you can have your project on there, and you can just essentially deploy it to GitHub itself, and you can use a custom URL. So I had to obviously, get the URL hosting somewhere else. That's actually on WordPress. But yeah, it just works fantastic. Best browsers are Chrome, but it'll work in Safari, Firefox, Edge, etc. Some of them just don't have some of the support for like the gamepad and stuff like that, or it's not as good. This is also open source, so it's out on the GitHub link. There's actually, if you go to the emulator itself, there's a link at the bottom that says report an issue. So if you find bugs, or you want feature enhancements, or you want to just help out with the project, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, and now we can move to Chris for questions. There is Chris.
And here I am.
Chris.
Thank you.
Have you been able to look at the questions as they were coming in?
Yeah, I did see a couple. There was also some ones on Discord as well. So one question from Mark Lemmert was, what toolkit am I using, or how did I create the controls for it? So I'm using TypeScript, and I'm using the React library. So that's a JavaScript library. And then along with that, I'm using a few, there's another library called Material, which has some really nice looking GUI controls. And so that allowed me to do that when you pop up the disk images, that grid of disk images. So it has a really nice control to do that. And then finally, the little icons at the bottom are from Font Awesome, which is just an icon library, and you just download those as either bitmaps or SVG files. So that was that. And then there was another question about the how do I detect the games? And Rickles asked that, and he's just guessing correctly, where what I'm doing is I'm just looking for specific bytes in memory. And what I typically do is just look for like the keyboard detection. So though most games or most programs will have like a load of C000, which is the keyboard soft switch. And so if you can find where those, say, 3 bytes are in the Apple II's memory, it's a pretty safe bet that for a particular game, the location of that in memory is going to only be correct for that game. And so far, I've tried that at a grand total of 6 things, and it's worked every time. I'm sure it could be fooled. In fact, if you just go into the monitor and enter those 3 bytes for, just when you're in the monitor, and then start up the emulator, it'll, suddenly think that it's running, Wizardry or Nox Archaist. No harm really in that. Let's see. Other questions. Is it customizable to, for say, change to the GUI graphics? I think if you're asking, is it easy to customize the I'm not sure if you're talking about the actual, the way the emulator looks and feels, like the actual JavaScript controls. Is that what you're talking about? If that's the question, then at least with my emulator, no, like the controls themselves are just basically embedded in the TypeScript. So you'd have to go in and just, change the code to use a different toolkit or something like that. Oh, the monitor bezel. Yes. Okay. Good question. That the bezel around the outside it's also just hard coded. There's a lot of things in this that are just hard coded, just because I liked them. That actually is a photograph of my Apple Color monitor, so I didn't want to have to worry about any copyright issues. So I just took a really high res photo of my my actual CRT, and then I embed that on the web page, and then I put the canvas, the JavaScript canvas, just right on top of it, basically. So it worked out really nice. So yeah, the question is, if you wanted to use your own image for that, you would have to download the code and run it yourself, which, I have the instructions to do that on GitHub. So it's not hard to do that, but it's not something that you could just do out of the box with just, say, by going to the website. Okay, any other questions? Don't see anything else. So like I said, I put the link, so Apple2TS.com, and that should work on both your desktop computers or on a phone or a tablet if you want to try it there. And I'm happy to take a look if anybody wants to help out with the project, or at least just look at the code and ask me questions. I'm happy to answer questions, or if you want to really dive in and submit pull requests or something, I'd be add support for your favorite game or something like that, and add joystick controls or something. It's not hard to do. Oh, let's see. Okay, another question from Darren. So yes, right now, his question is about, does it only emulate a 2E? Yes, right now, I started out actually with a 2+, because the memory map on a 2+ is a lot simpler. You don't have as many soft switches in the auxiliary card, but because there's so many games that they require 128K of memory, and I switched it at some point to to be a 2E. And I don't know whether necessarily I'll go back and make it full featured, and so you can actually select different systems or something. That's not really something I've thought about a lot, but it probably wouldn't be too hard to do that. And yes, okay, so here's a final question about the CRT shaders. No, I didn't talk about that. Somebody actually asked that question at KansasFest, but to answer it here, I have not really thought too much about that. I think it would be pretty straightforward to do. So with the HTML canvas, you can actually give it all sorts of filters and things that you can put on top. And so I think it would be very straightforward to do, like scan lines, or to make it look blurry, or tint, or anything, make it look kind of more CRT-ish. I think if you wanted to do that, you'd probably also have to take a look at how I'm actually doing the HDR pixels, just because I think I'm still making them a little bit too crisp compared to, say, a real monitor. So there'd probably be work on both kind of the back end for the way it's sending the graphics, and then also the JavaScript itself, but definitely doable. So, and I have a lot more plans for the future. I want to add support for debugging. I still want to do Mockingbird. I've been working on the sound over the last week, and I've got it so Nox Archaist actually sounds semi-decent. Still not as good as on a real computer, but it's much better than it was even since a week ago. So look for more check-ins. No, let's see. Very last question. Emulated Ethernet support. It does not have that. sure I could do it, but yes, no, sorry. Okay, that I better stop there. So I think we're running up against the time for the break. But yeah, thanks a lot for thanks a lot for watching. All right, I hope you enjoyed that recap of my video from KansasFest. I'll have some more videos in the future with more features that I've added. In the meantime, if you're not currently a YouTube subscriber, I'd really appreciate it if you would hit the subscribe button below. I also have a Patreon if you'd like to support me that way, and I'll have a link in the show notes. Once again, thanks for watching.